Hey everyone, today I've got a hardware sampler I'd like to talk about. This is the Akai S5000. So this is kind of the end of the era for Akai samplers and samplers in general. This came out in 1998 and it was really Akai's flagship at the time, just to be followed, basically by the S6000 right behind this, which I'll talk a little bit about too. Beyond that, DAWs started becoming really popular, and then Akai released the Z series slightly after that, early 2000s, but they were never as popular as the S series. The S series goes way back, originally to the most popular of the S series early on was a 900, 950, and then they had the 1000s, the 2000s, the 3000s, and various models among all those as well. And Akais have always just been kind of, the de facto samplers that a lot of people have used. So, the MPC line is an example of, the popularity of those. And you still see those used, by a lot of musicians today. So I've always loved hardware samplers. There's just something fun and neat about them, even though, technically they're somewhat obsolete based on just the capabilities that your modern DAW has. But there are some benefits to using those still today. Number one, they're fun. I kind of enjoy it. I like the hands-on experience of actually, creating a sample, basically capturing a sample and then modifying it with this gear, and then, using it with my synths and controlling it from the DAW for that matter. Two, a lot of these units, they have their own sound signatures. There's a certain sound to them that a lot of people like about. Going back again to the 900, 950, they weren't 16-bit, they were, 12-bit, I believe, at those, and then even, various other manufacturers out there like the early Ensonics, they were 8-bit samplers. They kind of had this raw, really gritty nature to them, and, sure, you can recreate that, in software today, but there is just something, special about those older units. A lot of times it has to do too with the digital analog conversion that was in there, because it was very primitive at the time, and then the filtering as well, which is a very important factor of the sound that these units give, and that's one of the reasons why they're very popular today. So in 2020, why would you buy a hardware sampler? Depends. For me, the reason why I like them is, number one, it's kind of nostalgia, because I remember when these came out, and I couldn't afford them because I was basically still in high school and college for that matter, and they were just amazing pieces of gear at the time. Even going back to the the 900 series and 1000s, 2000s, 3200 XLs, all the really popular units, they were still extremely expensive back in the time, and they're just pieces of gear I always wanted. So now that they're cheap and I've got my studio and I have fun playing with this stuff, I can get one now, and it is a blast to play with. Two, just to that point I was just making, is it's fun. So, it's more efficient just to click around in the DAW and do all your editing and stuff that way, but when you actually have a piece of hardware, for me, it's just more, fun to sit there and play with it and edit the patches and do your sampling and just, have fun playing with this gear, which was state of the art at the time. So lastly, there is a certain sound to these units that a lot of people like today. As I mentioned earlier, with the 900s being a lower bitrate and stuff like that, being kind of gritty, these newer units are pretty pristine sounding in terms of audio quality. They're all, 16-bit at least. They'll do 44.1, 48 kilohertz sampling rates. So I mean, they're very high quality. But it comes down to the way that the actual hardware, transposes the notes, as you're actually, playing it. So when you're doing a sample, say you just take a single sample, you're not doing multi-sampling or anything fancy like that, and then you start playing it, lower octaves and higher octaves, and the keyboard goes down. The hardware is doing those, translations basically, the pitch shifts basically that sound up and down, the audio spectrum in real time in hardware. And that usually ends up giving you, some artifacts and very unusual sounds, once you start getting really low octaves or extremely high octaves out of the note that you sampled it at. And a lot of times that can have a really neat effect that's difficult to get out of software. So you see this a lot, especially in the older samplers that are lower bit rates, but you do get it out of these newer ones too. And it is just kind of a neat sound that a lot of times is beneficial if you're looking to just have some creativity with different sounds that you're doing in typical sound design. So this Akai here actually works. This is one of the few sampler pieces of gear, I should say, that I've bought off eBay where I didn't buy it broken, strictly because they don't show up not working very often. This gear is late enough, made again, late 90s when it came out, that most of them are still working today unless they've really been beat up or abused. So secondly, that's really pretty much all SMD components at this time, switching power supply, So there's really not much you can repair on these anyway, if it is a logic level issue with this, outside of power supply and other common things like an encoder going bad or some buttons or LCD going out, stuff like that. So what I do want to do is I want to talk about this S5000 a little bit in this video, and I want to get into some of the hardware features of it in terms of some of the components in here that make it work, and then I want to talk about some of the upgrades I'm going to do to it. This one's pretty bare bones, so there was a lot of options you could get for this unit. Just to name a couple, the RAM is obviously upgradable in these units. This one's actually maxed out at 256 megs, which was pretty high for the time. It uses standard computer 72-pin SIMs, so it's not like extremely hard to find. It's just standard memory that's still even today really cheap and easy to get. You can add hard drives to these. It's all SCSI based. You can do external SCSI out the back as well for CD-ROMs and stuff. But you can also add a internal SCSI drive to this, which I plan on doing. I'll talk about that a little bit in this video. It's a pretty trivial operation. The floppy drive on this, I've tested it, it doesn't work. So I am going to replace it with one of the little USB emulator, USB drive emulators in there. Or on eBay for 20 bucks, or no big deal. It's just the direct replacement, you swap them in, and you can just use a USB stick to store your patches if you wish to do that way and transfer it to your computer. And that's one thing that's nice about this actually is in this series of sampler, it uses standard, basically PCM stereo samples, which is your WAV files, under computer use. So it's directly compatible with copying those data back and forth to computer. So if you dump your files to a floppy, or I'm going to do a USB stick, you can put those right in your computer and add them with whatever software you want, and don't have to worry about any special formats or dual mono channels or anything like that you would see in some of the older samplers. Another feature this had was there's actually a USB interface on there you can hook up to computer, which allows you to do a couple things. It allows you to transfer files back and forth pretty easily, and it also allows you to do some control. There's like some editors and stuff you can get to work with the software on here, but I don't have that option installed in this, so I just wanted to mention it. Another option too is bass. This is 64 voices of polyphony basically, but you could upgrade it to 128. Mine is only 64. I don't have that 128 card, but it is something else you can add on there. We'll look at the back real quick. So, a couple option ports here. One of these is where that USB port would go. You've got 8 standard outputs that are assignable from there. You can actually upgrade it with a second card that gives you 16 more. There's some other options here. There's additional optical interfaces you can add to it, and some other obscure options beyond that. It's got dual MIDI interfaces, which is kind of nice too. So you can actually have 2 sources of MIDI both in and out on this in terms of controlling it. And there's all sorts of parameters in there too, where you can do MIDI filters and stuff like that as far as the MIDI messages you want to use and don't use per channel, and assign it to different voices and parameters, which is pretty cool. So then it's got your digital options down here too. So if you were running a full digital studio and you had your word clock to keep everything synchronized and stuff like that, you'd be able to use those to actually not use the analog at all, which is kind of nice. So right now these are still relatively cheap. You can get them on eBay for under $200 often. $250, $300 for a really nice one, fully loaded with all your options and stuff like that. So they're still pretty affordable. But you can also find, like I said, as low as 150 bucks at times. And they're usually really clean. And like I said, they don't show up broken very often either. So they are pretty reliable units. They were expensive when they came out. They were like $2,000 or $3,000 starting, I believe. The S6000, which is the bigger unit than this, it's essentially the same unit, but it's got some more options. There's a bigger removable faceplate that actually comes off that you can put on your workstation and work away from this. The downside of it is huge. It's like 5U, so it uses a lot of rack space. But it does have more expandability, which is nice, and it comes standard with 128 voices. The last thing I need to do this too is update the firmware. We power it on here. You'll see I'm on the original, very, very early version 1 firmware, so I need to upgrade that to the latest version 2.14. Which is the latest one that had come out for the S5000. It's mostly bug fixes and some feature improvements in there, but there's no reason not to do it. It's just a simple update to throw floppy and just upgrade it with the floppy drive there. So next thing, real quick, I'm just going to power up the S5000 and just look at the boot sequence here and show a few things. So as it's starting up, it kind of gives you a hint of some of the options that are installed. It'll do a RAM count to show you how much memory you have, which will actually pop up here as it goes through. And then actually the effects, the onboard effects, this is another option or another feature I forgot that is not installed in my unit. This is basically a DSP effect card that lives in one of the expansion slots in the back internally that provides a lot of good effects for this unit, reverbs, delays, things like that. A lot of other options with that too. It's generally well liked. You don't see it too often in a lot of these units. They do, show up occasionally, for ones that are for sale. But if you do want the effects unit, it's usually better to try to buy a unit that actually has it built in, because the cards by themselves, when they do pop up on eBay, are usually pretty expensive, several $100s. Next, the ADAT I/O, as I mentioned, is not installed either. There's not a keyboard installed. This just uses a standard PS2 keyboard, which is kind of nice. So you can use that when you're naming your patches and your samples and things like that, which is pretty cool. Disk scan. You can see it's got the floppy drive there for the floppy that's currently in there, and then you can see it's got OS version 1.11, which is a very old version that I'm going to update. So if you go into utilities and then show hardware, from here it'll give you a little bit more information. And actually, this is showing 128 voices, so I was wrong. I thought this had only 64, but it does have the optional card in there, which is cool. Interesting. I didn't think this unit had that, but apparently it does. I've got all 128. So there's 2 voice cards in there, which again just are cards that contain the DSP or the custom ASICs that actually handle a lot of the sound generation for this unit, and only 1 is installed by default. So you can buy a second one to upgrade it to 128, and if that's installed, it shows there, which it does, which is cool. So anyway, no discs show on there, obviously, because there's no other drives, SCSI drives attached via internally or externally. So that is going to be one of the things I mentioned that I'm going to add to this, is a internal SCSI hard drive. The first thing I'm going to do, though, is I'm going to update the firmware. So to do that, I've got the floppy with the latest version. What is it, 2.14? Yeah, 2.14. And I've already got that, on a floppy now. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to replace this drive, since I know it's not working, with another good drive that I know is working, just to get the firmware updated. And then once that's actually updated and done, then I'm going to put in the USB floppy emulator, so I can just use a USB stick to transfer stuff back and forth from this unit. I'll talk about some of the internal hardware in a little bit more depth here towards the end of the video, but for now, to get the floppy out, basically, there's 2 screws in the top here on this tray and 2 screws in the bottom, and then disconnect the cables, it'll slide out the front. Alright, so for the firmware update here, I've had to mess around for a little bit. I had to go through like an enormous amount of floppy drives until I finally found one that works. And then I made a new system disk too for the OS update, just because I had doubts if that disk was working itself. But so the process is basically you take your disk that you've written the bin image to, just a DOS formatted floppy, place it in the machine while it's off, power it on, and it'll come up. The display will stay dark, and then it'll come up. And at that point, it'll start the screen right now. Well, it's, you see it already says V2, even though the OS hasn't been technically loaded yet. And then it's coming up, and then it gives you the option write flash OS. So this is the process that will actually take the current version of firmware that you want to update it and write it to flash on the system, so you don't need to boot off the floppy anymore. So to proceed, you go ahead and hit yes. And now it's actually going to write the current image on that floppy to the S5000 itself, and that will complete the actual update process. Okay, so flash programming complete. Please restart your machine. So pop the floppy out, power cycle it off, turn it back on, and we should be happy with version 2.14, which it looks like we are. So there we are, version 2.14 is installed. You can see on the main screen here too, they've updated, they got a couple more icons, so you can have a little bit more information about the system. There's my voice count, 128, RAM, 256 megs, and then you can see I don't have any of the installed options for the effects, and then the ADAT interface, and also USB port, and then I don't have a keyboard plugged in right now as well. Okay, so next steps, I want to get this little USB floppy emulator installed in here so I can use that moving forward, and then I'm going to talk about hard drives and putting the hard disk in this unit. So this device is what I want to put in there to replace the existing floppy drive. What it is, it's basically a USB emulator where it emulates a floppy via a USB stick. So what you can do is you can put a USB stick in here, and then you can actually cycle through, you know, I forget how many 1,999, whatever it is, individual floppies that you can save to, like, well, you know, at high density amounts, 1.4, you know, megs per little instance on that USB stick. So it's cool because you can use this for a lot of devices to store your data too, especially if it's an older device and it doesn't support a hard disk or anything like that. But it also makes it really easy to transfer files back and forth between your computer. So these on eBay eBay's just flooded with these. I'm pretty sure there's like 20 companies in China making them. They're branded GoTech. I don't even know who actually makes these, like I said, because there's so many for sale. And they typically run about 20, 25 bucks, something like that. You'll find people selling them for premium, saying, you know, they'll work with, you know, Akai S5000 or whatever and want, you know, 50 bucks for it. But any generic one will work. I mean, they come in white, they come in black, they come in both high density and standard density formats. So you can get them for pretty much anything, and they pretty much will work with anything. Because all it is doing is just pretending, you know, it's imitating the actual floppy interface. So I'm going to put this in here and just test it, make sure everything's good, but I don't think I'm going to have any issues with it. So here is the floppy emulator installed in my Akai S5000. So it's a direct replacement. There's really nothing to it. The data cable and the power cable come out of the floppy, they plug into this, they're in the same spots, and that's it. So power it on, it comes up, and these integers here are the address that you're currently, like the floppy that you're indexing, you know, the virtual floppy, if you want to call it that way, that you're indexing right now in the unit. And you can decrement these up by pressing the buttons there to pick, you know, which floppy you want to use. The USB stick in there, I have just one of these little low profile, it's 16 gig one by SanDisk. A bunch of people make these. I like them because it's nothing sticking out for you to knock into, you know, and potentially break it or knock it out of the unit. So it's finished its power up cycle. You can see it's got the floppy icon there indicating this detected a floppy. So if you go into utilities and then disk utilities, press disk list, and you can see there's my Akai floppy that I've got in there I named. So I went ahead and already formatted it, and formatted, you know, the index 00 on here. Like I said, you can increment, you know, through and pick which one you want in there. But under 00, that's the floppy that's there, and I can save and restore to that, which is pretty cool. So next I want to talk about hard drives, and you've got a few options for, you know, if you want to actually install a disk into this unit itself. So hard drives, I'm going to talk about that next. But before I start talking about these spinning disks, the one thing I really want to mention is right now, if you're looking at a hard drive to your S5000 or any older sampler for that matter, you shouldn't be using a spinning disk. There's better solutions. One of those solutions is a device called SCSI to SD. What it is, it's a little board that emulates a SCSI hard drive and allows you to store your data to an SD card. It's simple, it works, it's reliable. They're about $70 and they work with all these older samplers. Tons of people use them. It's really what you should be using. I'm going to throw one of these SCSI drives into my S5000 strictly just because I have it here, and it'll provide useful info for somebody who's looking to do the same. Because again, you know, these drives are still good drives. These older SCSI drives are pretty reliable things. They're designed for server environments. You know, they're very well built. And if you already have one laying around, you know, and you can use it in your device just by buying a couple cables, then, you know, why not at that point save some money? So if you're looking to get a drive, obviously pick a size that makes sense for you. You know, somewhere between 36 gig and 73 gigs probably fine. You can get all the way up to 300 and 600 gig SCSIs. I don't know what the max size, if there is one, in the S5000. I've put a 147 gig drive in there, and I know it works up to at least that. It may work higher. So for the interface, there's a couple different interfaces. The S5000 actually uses a standard SCSI 1 or SCSI 2 type 50-pin connector, just a ribbon cable style connector. And the problem is you're not going to find any drive made in like the past 20 years that has that type of connector on it. You know, it's pretty much been obsoleted by newer styles like this one here. This is a 68-pin style connector, and then you've got your SCA style too. The SCA style is an 80-pin connector that's hot swappable, and it's usually designed for workstations, high-end workstations and servers, you know, where you can actually, you know, remove the drive on the fly. And it was popular for a long time until, you know, SAS came out, and the SAS drives pretty much replaced these, and that's all been replaced by, you know, SSDs and NVMEs and stuff like that now, but that's beside the point. So, because these are the most common type of drives, that's probably what you're going to see. And if you do have one of those, you need to adapt it to, you know, your 50-pin connector. And you can do that by one of these little boards here. So what these are is they have the 80-pin connector on the back for the SCA interface, and then a 50-pin connector along with the 68-pin in the front, and it plugs right into the back of the SCSI drive. So along with this, you got your power connector to give it power, you know, plus 12 plus 5 volts, and then you've got some jumpers here for your activity LED, then your ID, among some other options, SCSI ID and some other options on there. These are like $5 or $6 from eBay or Amazon or whatever. You can find them all over the place, and they do work pretty well. The one thing I don't like is the power connector on the back here. You know, it sits really close to the drive when it's plugged in. So I always wrap it in some tape just to make sure when you're plugging stuff in, it doesn't short out, you know, on the back of the drive. Now the drive itself matters somewhat because depending on the SCSI drive you get, it can be really loud. What you probably don't need is these higher spindle speed drives like 15k RPM drives or even the 10k RPM drives if you can avoid it, because those drives commonly are a little bit louder than the older like 5400 RPM or 7200 RPM SCSI drives that you find. Now it varies from drive to drive. I've had some 15k drives that are whisper quiet. So, you know, it all depends. When I go through my drives to figure out which one I'm going to use, you know, in my S5000, I'm just going to plug them all in, see which one's quiet, and just go with that drive essentially. In terms of performance, again, it doesn't matter either. You don't need an Ultra 160 or an Ultra 320 style drive for the S5000 because, you know, it operates at SCSI 2 speeds, so you're talking 20-30 megabytes per second max. So you're going to get no performance gain from any of these in the higher end drives. It's just really a matter of picking a good drive that you know is going to be reliable and hopefully not too old, so it's not going to fail anytime soon, and picking one that's quiet. Another downside of these high performance drives is they get really hot. You know, these drives are designed for forced airflow. You know, in servers you've got airflow going over them, and in the S5000 you don't, because there's no forced airflow in the S5000. There's not even a fan on it. It's a sealed box. There's a couple slits in the top and the bottom for, you know, convection airflow, but that is it. So these drives get really hot, you know, it's going to lower their lifespan if they don't have any type of cooling, and two, it's just going to heat up the insides of your S5000, which isn't good for anything. So last thing you need to pay attention to is termination. So these drives, the newer ones, they don't have any type of built-in termination on the drive like you usually do see in the older drives. You'll have some jumpers to actually enable termination. On these, the termination is always handled by the backplane, so it's never really a concern. But the problem is the S5000 wants to see a SCSI terminator on the SCSI chain for its use. Now, these little boards here, they don't have any type of termination, and neither does the drive. So you can buy an adapter that actually has termination resistors built onto it. The downside is these are a little bit more expensive. They get up to $25-30 instead of $5 or $6 for the little ones that don't have it. So you can use this instead, and you plug that in there on your drive and just use your SCSI cable directly to the S5000, and it'll work, and you won't have any issues. If you don't have one of those and just have one of these, you can still do it, but you need a SCSI terminator. So if you got a ribbon cable that has multiple connectors on the ends there, you can still use it. What you'll want to do is put the terminator, you know, on the end of the SCSI bus, and then plug the cable, you know, onto the adapter itself. And in this case, with the termination resistor on there, you know, your S5000 will see the drive. Without the termination resistors, it's hit or miss if the actual S5000 will detect the drive. Some drives it will, some it won't. It just depends on a lot of factors there. But, you know, for the older standards, you need the termination resistor to actually make it work reliably, and that's the key point. So here's the drive I ended up picking for the S5000. It's a Maxter Atlas 73 gig SCSI. It's 10k RPM, but it's whisper quiet. I can barely hear it, and it doesn't get very warm. I've had it on for quite a while, and it stayed nice and cool, which is awesome. So, I mean, the S5000, when you put the drive in, you got it properly terminated, you got power to it. When you boot it up, you'll see another icon here on the front indicating that there's a hard disk found. Right after it does its disk search. And to actually see the information on that, if you go to Utilities, and then Disk Utilities, and then go Disk List, now you'll see there's a second disk listed on the list here. Then if you go Info, it'll give you the Atlas information for it. So there it is, Maxter Atlas 10K 73 SCA. So that's the drive that I will put in the unit right there. Now to use it, you do have to format it. Two ways of doing this. You can format it in an external machine, you know, before you bring the drive over. It just needs a standard FAT file system. Or you can format it right here on the actual S5000 itself. Now there's two format options. There's quick format, full format. Do quick format. If you do full format for a 73 gig drive, I mean, it'll probably take well over a day, if not multiple days, to actually format this thing. So definitely always do quick format and then proceed. And it'll ask you for a name that you actually want to name it. I'll just leave it as whatever, doesn't matter, I'll rename it later. And then go yes, and then it goes ahead and formats. And with the quick format option, it should only take a couple minutes tops to do this. There, now it's complete. Does a disk search again, and there it is. So format FAT32, and I'm sorry, I said FAT earlier, I meant FAT32 as far as how you want to format the actual drive in terms of the file system. So if you go disk info now, you can say free space 69.9 gigabytes. So we are good. The last step is to actually just install the drive into the S5000, which the drive will actually sit right here inside the chassis. So here's a close-up of the S5000 with the hard drive installed. So the hard drive's sitting right here, right next to the floppy emulator, which is sitting right here next to it. And you have just enough room back here with that adapter board for the SCSI interface to basically get the cables in and connect everything in there. So the main ribbon cable comes from the back over here, just out of frame. There's a connector on the back of the board labeled SCSI. And you bring that up over here and through, and then connect to the board right here. For power, the power supply right here has a second daughter board where there's actually a connector here for the internal hard drive option. Now there is an official cable you can buy that will plug into this connector here and then give you the Molex connector for your hard drive power. I didn't have one or feel like buying one, so I just soldered. I just took a regular power cable, cut the ends off, soldered it directly to the pins there, and just put some heat shrink tube on there to keep it safe. And again, there's just enough room in here for all these cables to be routed, so everything right there is good. So again, ideally you're not using a spinning disc in this. You're using the SCSI to SD adapter, and it's pretty much the same installation method. If you're using that, you just need to find a place to mount the board. It'll fit here. There's plenty of room. It's just you need to make a little bracket or something to hold it in place. It's not flopping around inside the unit. There's some other room, over on the right side of the unit here too, where you can place it. And then the SCSI cable just goes back to the same SCSI location in the back here. So last thing I want to do is talk a little bit about some of the hardware inside the S5000. So an interesting note is the main board in here is used in both the S5000 and the S6000. It's the exact same board in both. You can actually see some S6000 references like down here for this front connector that's not populated for the S6000. So depending on the configuration, because they are slightly different, the S6000's got that removable display. Some of the configuration for the front panel is a little bit different on there, but other than that, the units are pretty much spec-wise identical. The manuals even reference everything the same. They run the same firmware as far as I know. Everything else is identical on them, just the S6000 has that extra expandability option and that nice removable front display. So anyway, as I mentioned before, this is 386. It's a 386 based embedded processor, which actually lives underneath this audio board here. I'll pull this off in a minute and show that. But it's pretty much common PC architecture. If you look at this main board, there's not a whole lot, different in this than a typical 386 from the time. So all your sample memory lives up here. These are 72-pin SIMs. I'm not sure if they're 60 or 70 nanoseconds. I kind of have to point out to look. Doesn't really matter. But so 64 megs a piece. That's where you get your 256 megs of sample RAM. This has some onboard sample RAM, I believe, too, that actually gets disabled when you fully populate this with a full 256. That way, if you don't have any installed, you've got like 4 megs or 8 megs or something very minimal, which are these chips most likely here. So this unit does have a lithium battery because some options can be stored in RAM. That battery's hiding right down underneath here. It's socketed, which is nice, so it's easy to be replaced. I went ahead and checked it's good, but I'm just going to replace it anyway because I'm in here. Besides that, in this back area here, this is where your expansion ports are. So you've got a handful here for various expansions. First is your effect board, and then you've got digital audio expansion, so that's for like your ADAT interface. Following that, you've got another expansion for the USB option, among other things, and both of those can be used for that right there. Although this one has the rear panel access. And if you notice right here, it's kind of interesting. There's actually another IDC pin header that's labeled IDE, which is kind of funny because you would think, okay, it's got an IDE interface there for an IDE drive, which would be awesome because just putting an IDE drive in here would be much simpler than trying to deal with a SCSI drive. But unfortunately, even though this exists on the motherboard, the IDE interface, as far as I know, was never actually implemented in firmware. So although it's right there, it doesn't do anything. I've actually tried playing with it sometime in the past just to see if I could get an IDE drive working on there and recognized by any means, and there's nothing. No activity on it whatsoever as far as anything I could tell. So unfortunately never implemented, but it's just kind of funny it's there. So these two cards are your voice expansion cards. So by default the unit comes with one, and that's your initial 64 voices. The second card can be added in, that's for your additional 64 to get you 128 voices out of this unit. And this was the card I didn't think I had, which is actually in here, which is cool. So again, you can find these on eBay, but they're expensive. They're over $100, so it's almost better if you need it to try to find a unit that already has it built in if you want the extra voices there. So in terms of your analog boards, or conversion boards I should say, there's two of them. You have your output board over here in the back, and then your input board over here in the front corner. This actually accepts your input to do samples. So we'll talk about this one first. This board actually has all of the digital analog converters directly on it. So, and there's 4 of them right here. These are stereo DACs for your 8 channels, so you got 4 of them total. And they are made by AKM. They are AK4324s. And they're actually pretty high spec DACs. They're Delta Sigma DACs, and they're 24-bit 96 kilohertz. So, you know, pretty high spec in this unit, which is pretty cool. And then on the output of those, you've got your typical, you know, filtering and some op amps there to drive each of the actual individual outputs. All the capacitors on here too are Rubicons, so they're good quality caps. They're all 85C rated, not 105C. But again, this is strictly just the audio circuitry. You know, they don't see the stress that like a power supply would, for that matter. So here's your input sampling board over here. One thing I'll note too is they use localized regulators on both of these boards, which is kind of cool. So you got your 7912 and 7812 here if you're plus and minus 12 volt rails for your op amps and converters. So they do have a localized analog supply or supply dedicated just for each of these boards, which is kind of neat. So typically you'd see separate analog digital supplies, you know, off of your main supply. In this case, it doesn't look to be that way. You know, they're delivering, you know, just the voltage off, 24 volts or whatever it might be, to each of these individual boards and then converting it locally. So the analog digital converter that lives in this board is down here. That's another AKM chip. This is an AK5340, 18-bit analog digital converter. So another pretty well spec chip. And again, all the capacitors in this board, again, are Rubicons, 85C rated. And since both of these boards are doing all the conversion locally, you strictly just have digital data coming off each one to the main board. So it's kind of a good design in that regard in terms of noise, because, you know, you've got digital data going to, as far as it can, right to the analog, or from the input, you know, digital, then digital back out to the outputs. So I lifted the audio board out of the way so we could get a peek underneath at the main processor, which lives right here. So it's an Intel 386EX processor. So full part number is i386EX33, so the 33 megahertz version of this processor. And what this is, it's basically an embedded version of the Intel 386SX processor. So overall specs the same. 32-bit internal architecture. It's got a 16-bit data bus, you know, up to 33 megahertz clock speed. And there's a couple other embedded features on this that you don't find in the 386 that make it more useful for embedded type systems. For example, it's got a JTAG interface. It has watchdog timers. It has various, you know, counters like you'd find on a typical microcontroller. So a lot of features there that make it, you know, interface in more of a, you know, embedded device like this a little bit easier. Sitting right next to it is our Intel flash memory. That's where we actually updated the firmware and wrote that too. And then interestingly, there's a unpopulated socket right here for a ROM. And then there's some jumpers over here on the side, which basically are labeled in position right here, boot from flash, and then the secondary position actually boot from this ROM. So that must have been for some, you know, firmware debugging, testing, things like that. But it's kind of neat because, you know, in theory, if someone wanted to really, you know, play with this unit and do some hacking on it, you could probably get it to do other things by putting your own ROM in that socket right there. And again, you can see the labels on the board here, S5000, S6000, because it was used in both units. So lastly, the power supply. It's kind of funny, it's made by Skynet Electronics. But anyway, typical switching supply, nothing too special about it, but again, it is a quality supply. It's got Nippon Chemicon 105C rated capacitors, it looks very well designed, got nice input protection and filtering. So, you know, they put a good power supply in this unit that, you know, as far as I can tell, is going to have still a very long life, you know, moving forward. So this concludes my video of the Akai S5000 sampler. These are awesome devices. They're really cool. I mean, they're state-of-the-art at the time, and they still really hold up today in terms of just audio quality and features. And I've always liked the Akais personally compared to other samplers, just because they're extremely easy to use. I mean, you can sit down with this unit without even looking at the manual, and it just makes sense. Every feature of it's just super intuitive, and it's just a joy to use. You can't say that for every Akai, you know, in the past, especially some of the ones that had the smaller displays, but they were still better than most, you know, comparing to some like the Yamaha series. Like, I've got an A4000 and an A3000, and like the UI in both of those is significantly more difficult to use than this Akai S5000. So I hope this video was beneficial for you, and thank you for watching.